Fallen branches crisscrossed over one another were more of a problem now than steepness. She dropped below the snow line and sat on a downed log to take off her crampons. They snagged on things, reducing her already slow progress. Bundling the steel spikes, she secured them to her pack, and then called Brent's name again and again. Anger gave way to fear something hideous had happened. He'd careened down the slope like a madman, but she hadn't heard him scream. Surely she'd have heard something if he'd fallen. His exhortation about heading for the car rattled in the back of her mind. Was there some sort of danger she wasn't aware of? Was that why he'd abandoned her? She shook her head. It didn't make sense. If danger lurked nearby, he should have stayed to protect her, not taken off like a bat out of hell. Alice shivered. The temperature was somewhere south of freezing. Her wool top, jacket, and pants were wet with sweat on the inside and wet from falling in the snow so many times on the outside. Between the two, it would take hours for the thick cloth to dry. Thank God it wasn't windy. Wind chill would add to her woes. She set her lantern off to one side so its hiss wouldn't drown out something important, and listened. The welcome sound of water cascading over stones sounded from below. If she just kept on downhill, she had to come to the North Fork of Big Pine Creek. Even if it's the South Fork, it's not the end of the world, she muttered. Come daylight, I'll recognize something. She settled her lantern back in place and pulled a pair of wool mitts out of her pack. When she got to her feet, she groaned. Everything hurt, but tomorrow would be worse once her overtaxed muscles stiffened up. Cursing under her breath, she gathered her things together and worked her way through increasingly thick deadfall. As she down-climbed, she thought about Brent. All they were really was friends. She'd tried to make it more than that, to flirt with him, but he'd never been interested. He made a most excellent climbing partner, though. At least he had until today. None of the women she knew had the least interest in the mountains, and men thought it unwomanly for her to don climbing regalia and take to the hills. Except Brent. He understood the pull of the Sierras and didn't think it at all odd she felt the same. She pressed her tongue against her teeth. It was the 1930s after all. Women were more than baby machines, and unpaid cooks and housekeepers. She'd been practically the only female in many of her college classes, especially the math and science ones. Even with a degree, it hadn't been easy to get a job in civil engineering. It's not your credentials, she'd been told over and over. You're just going to get married and all the time and money we put into training you will go to waste. She'd been so grateful to the Orange County firm that finally hired her. She'd come perilously close to breaking into tears. Alice shook her head, but gently. No point in making the lantern go out. It was heavy strapped to her head. She'd be glad to get to somewhere she could stop for the night. She called Brent's name every few minutes. If he'd been knocked unconscious, maybe something would get through since hearing was the last sense to go. The sound of rushing water grew louder. So loud she worried how she would get across it. If it was the right creek, and it pretty much had to be, the trail was on the other side. She and Brent had crossed the turbulent flow using a rough wooden bridge much farther up the narrow canyon. The hillside steepened again. If it got any worse, she'd need to face into the hill to keep going. She stopped on the uphill side of a fat tree bowl long enough to lash her axe to her pack to free both hands. Alice used thick timber to control her descent, wrapping her hands around branches to keep herself from sliding down the muddy mountainside. Bark poked through her mittens and hurt her hands. Holy shit! She tightened her fingers reflexively on slick bark. The creek, running at close to flood stage from an early snowmelt, was right below her. She'd nearly fallen into it. Her heart raced. She'd been careful, but she was tired. Too tired to be in a place where every step required thought. Water swirled around huge boulders 10 feet below her. No way in hell to cross there. She looked downstream, but she couldn't see very far. The beam from her lamp was broad rather than deep.